I'm Tom Skalak. I'm from Bainbridge Island, Washington, and I'm here as a writer working on my first novel.
I'm Judith Dancoff. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I'm here also working on a novel. I was at another writer's residency, the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, and some people heard my writing and they said, you have to apply to Djerassi, Scientific Delirium Madness. They will accept you, but you did, and I was blown away and thrilled, so.
Well, for me, it was a little bit different. I've been working in science for over 30 years, and I had really been committed to combining the human creativity that's in the arts and humanities with what I think is the pioneer spirit in the sciences. And I had met Margot Knight several times, a couple years before I first came here, and really admired what Djerassi's mission was to combine different sorts of human endeavor across the arts and the sciences, so I wanted to be part of it.
It's because I came here with a very personal literary novel that draws on both my father's history as a Manhattan Project physicist, who died when I was quite young, and my search for him over the years. It's a reimagined history, not a historical fiction, reimagined in the same way that Toni Morrison writes about slavery in Beloved in a very creative way. But I've been working on that quite effectively and productively since I've been here. But I think actually it was in the year 2000 when the human genome was first talked about and discovered, this idea for a science fiction novel came to me. But I never quite knew how to manifest it or make it real. And then when I met Tom the first night and I said, what are you working on? And he said, he told me his background was in genomics and that he had a science fiction novel about it. I said, I've got to tell that person, I've got to talk to him about it. And I was just very moved and affirmed that he liked the idea, he took it seriously, and he kind of helped me see ways in which to make it real, which I'm going to do down the road.
Well, Judith and I have been having breakfast together
Yes.
this whole month here at the breakfast table in the Artist Barn. And, over these breakfasts and some other meals, we've been, I guess, working through the structure of stories, either short stories or novel-length stories. So for me, it was really gaining Judith's greater experience in constructing prose. And so I've written a lot in my life, thousands and thousands of pages, but not in the form of a three-act drama. And so I came here with the idea that my thriller, which is based on a scientific discovery and leads to a chase and a worldwide shift in the balance of political power, was going to be force-driven, plot-driven. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about how characters drive a story. And so for me, the greatest part of the collaboration has been figuring out how and when to introduce the context and background for each character and what motivates them, and how to intertwine that with the more conceptual parts of my story, which is really what a science-based thriller is based on, is the scientific discovery. So that's been really fun, and it's actually helped me construct the novel.
Well, I think from the time I was a young child, I always wanted to be an artist. That was my first background, was in the visual arts, and then filmmaking, and then by the time I was in my 30s, I was writing prose. I think I've said, another thing I did here was complete a literary nonfiction essay. And the title of the essay is My Father, the Atom Bomb. And because I realized quite literally I would not be who I am today had it not been for my father's involvement in that. And quite literally, it was the thing that got me into writing. So that was the first subject that I attempted to write about. And this book has been inside me for most of my life, and I have finally gotten to the point where I feel I can write it, where I feel I both have the emotional maturity as well as the literary experience to be able to do that. And that's where I am in my career, if that answers.
For me, I've always enjoyed reading. And so I guess I would say I've sort of wanted to be a writer since I was young, probably a teenager, high school. Probably envisioned myself being a writer, but I instead went into science, and I went into engineering and science, bioengineering. And not really because it offered a more sure way to a salary or a career, but really because I was excited about it. I considered medical school, but got excited about applying the quantitative precision methods of engineering to what we don't understand about the human body and about ecosystems and life on Earth. And that's really where I've spent my scientific career. But then, my heroes as a boy were writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote about Mars and who wrote about Tarzan, and these were really dramatic adventures, but with very beautiful language and structure to the stories. And then as I got older, I learned many different languages, including Russian. I read Tolstoy and Lermontov in Russian, and so I really enjoyed a lot of the world's literature. But meanwhile, I was on a scientific track, and in my professional career, I became I guess very acutely aware that human relationships and often crises of personal integrity are what make or break a career or a person's relationship with another or your role in an organization. And, I actually wanted to write my first novel by the time I was about 33, which is when Joseph Conrad came back from the sea and began writing books like Lord Jim. And his books, of course, are all about a moment in someone's life where they hit an important decision or crisis, and they have to make an important decision. And this would be called a transformation of the character, I guess, in a character-driven novel. And so I really always admired that type of book. And so, but then what I wanted to do, combining crises of personal integrity, I also realized that nowadays, we really don't have very many public intellectuals or people who want to put science in the public eye, like Carl Sagan or like Michael Crichton and so on. And so I really wanted to put more time into that. And I've done that by testifying to the US Congress, working with the White House on innovation. But I don't think these kinds of professional activities reach people's, hearts and minds, how they think and feel. I think books, film can really make a big impression on how people think and feel. So that's really my goal, to use a genre form like a thriller, but to put science more in the public eye. Well, Cantor's Dilemma by Carl Djerassi is a fantastic example of science in fiction. And he wrote it at a time, decades ago, when there really weren't very many novels that had serious science, the real world of professional science, in a novel form that would be accessible to the general public. So I really view that novel not only as a standalone and a great read, and I'd really recommend it to people to read, but I think it was transformational for the field also, because I think many other writers were inspired by it, and you've seen novels, for example, recently, most people will know, perhaps, who hear this discussion about Andy Weir, who just wrote The Martian after a 25-year career in technology, became a major motion picture with Matt Damon. And so I think, in a way, Cantor's Dilemma paved the way for these kinds of mass media explorations of science and the impact of science on society. And of course, Carl Djerassi's own career was an exemplar of that. And so for many, many reasons, I enjoyed it. And actually, a final reason is that he came to writing in the last quarter of his own life and his own career. So it was an inspiration for me also that you could have a career in science and then turn your attention to it. And in his autobiography, actually, which I just read here at the resident artist program for the first time, when he was about 91, He said, I turned to fiction because I realized it was in fiction is the only way you can tell the real truth.
I strongly agree with that. Toni Morrison also said something about that. She said, the important distinction for me is not the difference between fact and fiction, but the difference between fact and truth. Fact can exist without human consciousness, but truth cannot. Direct quote, anyway. Well, I just want to say, I mean, in general and then specifically, my experience here has greatly influenced me. And one way, just in general, is just in the dinner conversations and so forth, I've always been that person who had these strange ideas or other ideas when people would say things. And then suddenly I find scientists responding to me. And I feel it's even perhaps, what is that part of the genome that is affected in a person's life?
The epigenome.
The epigenome. And I felt that perhaps that I never knew my father, but perhaps that part of my father is inside of me. And I feel I'm experiencing it here. I'm experiencing the science part of me. And yes, I have that in me. And so that's been very strong. And then something else that's been extremely powerful, after I did a short reading here of my book in progress, and Hideo Mabuchi heard it, and he really responded to it. He identified other writers that I remembered him. I reminded him of that I was so flattered by the names of these other writers. And then he suggested I go to Hiroshima, which I've never done, which I never even thought of doing. And suddenly it rang such a loud bell within me that I made my plans, I bought a ticket, and I'm going at the end of the month. And that's because of Hideo. And I'm just like, it brings me to tears, I can't believe it. But I'm going because the anniversary is August 6th, and I feel in my going is two things. I mean, I'm seeing the other side of what it is my father did, and I'm also kind of making amends for my father that maybe in his lifetime he would have been able to do that. I don't know, but I'm doing it for him. So.
Well, for me, many, many things. I have to say, I would add to the other artists and scientists here, also the natural landscape that surrounds us. Yes. I almost put on par with the human collaboration is the collaboration with the natural world. When I first came here, I was most struck by the quiet, and which kind of supports a reflective behavior. And as the Djerassi saying goes, we get the gift of time. But for me, the quiet and the reflection would be the two key words. And then you begin to get distracted actually from your own practice by all the other intellects that are here and the creative force and all these other people. And so for me, there's just many, many ones. Barbara Berry I found very inspiring when she constructed a stone cairn for the winter solstice, because I felt her sort of going back to her own roots, her own heritage, to imagine the spiritual importance of a stone cairn, which is a very sort of ancestral structure for her. And then also her works in color, the color blocks that she's made, and I helped her install out in the forest, and they almost appear to be floating in the forest. And what's interesting about that is that they are intended to be more lasting. And then there are other works, for example, by Eleanor Holmes or Eliot North, our poet from the UK who's here that we've interacted a lot with. She wrote a poem in some redwood planks and also a series of words for the cloud banks that exist here. And that was interesting because she had a different view, which was that she wanted them to be ephemeral and to be worn away over time by the forces in the landscape. So one thing I realized, everyone here is sort of a philosopher of everything. That was the one thing that really hit me. And everyone here is connecting these dots in their own practice and experience of the world and of each other. And in a way, seeking to create things that exhibit transcendence and either make you feel connected to your ancestors or perhaps to the sort of timeless shape of the landscape.
Well, I just feel one thing I really got in terms of my own practice, time spent in my studio writing, and that opened up this manuscript I'm working on, and I feel more avenues in the manuscript. And so that's primarily what it is. I feel more confidence in terms of working on the manuscript and more pages written and continue to write pages. And, but also, I made a kind of deadline date with Tom. I'm going to be sending him a synopsis of my science fiction novel, mid-September-ish. And he's going to be responding to it, or we'll have a conversation about it. And I just want to stress that this science fiction book, while more sort of just fun and commercial than my literary novel, I also feel strongly about the sort of philosophic ideas in it, and it just simply would not happen without a connection with Tom. It would not have happened. I could say that on camera for when it gets published, and who knows what happens to it.
Well, for me, I undertook a career transition to come to Djerassi, which was to leave my prior professional role so I could concentrate fully on writing, actually starting with this experience. So for me, it could be a pivotal life transition where I will pivot into writing for the last part of my life, like Carl Djerassi did, if the book is successful. So my plan with Judith is that we're going to have champagne together about a year from now, when both of our books hit the newsstands at an airport near you. So that's actually my dream, is that we really will be able to have these works come out and then continue working on them together.
And then also, I'm in exchange for the information that Tom's going to give me, I'm going to be reading pages, yes, and sort of that kind of writing feedback. And I just want to say also that I do feel a life change bubbling up also. And when I first looked at Djerassi's website and said, oh, this place changed my life, and I thought, that's a little hyperbolic. I don't know about that. But now I just feel I just want to go from residency to residency and work on my novel and write, and so who knows?